Adekunle arrived in Dallas with nothing but a dream and a worn notebook filled with stories from his African village. He was 50, but age meant nothing to his ambition. He sold everything for a one-way ticket, believing in the magic of a new beginning. The city lights below promised hope, but as he stepped into the airport, the world felt cold and unfamiliar. Alone, with no plan or contacts, he clung to his stories, the only piece of home he had left. Adekunle, the storyteller, had arrived in Dallas, ready to chase his dream. Dallas was not the land of opportunity Adekunle imagined. His savings vanished quickly. The city was indifferent, its people hurried and distant. Attempts to share his stories were met with polite dismissal. Soon, he was homeless, his dream fading with every cold night spent on a park bench. The vibrant tales in his notebook felt like cruel reminders of what he'd lost. Dallas was not his stage, it was his prison. Survival became Adekunle's new script. He mapped out shelters and soup kitchens, his world shrinking to a few desperate city blocks. The city's grandeur now loomed over him, indifferent to his struggle. Hunger, exhaustion, and fear replaced hope. His reflection in shop windows showed a man he barely recognized. The dreamer was vanishing, replaced by a shadow among the city's forgotten. The concrete jungle was erasing his identity. Loneliness pressed in heavier than hunger or cold. Surrounded by millions, Adekunle was invisible, an island in a sea of strangers. He whispered his stories to himself, desperate for connection. Memories of home faded, replaced by the ache of isolation. The city moved on, indifferent to his existence. In Dallas, Adekunle was not just homeless, he was unseen. The notebook, once his treasure, now felt like a burden. His stories mocked him, relics of a life slipping away. Survival left no room for dreams. The filmmaker inside him was dying. Regret and doubt consumed him. Had he traded everything for nothing? The dream that brought him across the ocean had become a nightmare. Adekunle, the storyteller, had run out of stories. All that remained was the silence of a city that never noticed he was there. Just when the darkness seemed absolute, a small light appeared. Adekunle was huddled in a doorway, his spirit at its lowest ebb. He had given up. The notebook lay forgotten in the tattered bag beside him. Then a gentle voice cut through the city's noise. "Excuse me, sir? Are you all right?" Instead of a police officer, he saw a woman with kind eyes and a warm smile. She held out a steaming cup of coffee. "You look like you could use this," she said softly. It had been so long since anyone had truly looked at him with anything other than pity or disgust. There was a sincerity in her gaze that disarmed him. He reached out and took the offering. Her name was Sarah. She simply sat on the cold pavement, creating a space of shared humanity. For the first time in months, Adekunle felt a flicker of his old self return. The simple act of her presence began to chip away at the thick wall of ice that had formed around his heart. As she got up to leave, she pointed to a community outreach center just down the street. She smiled and walked away. It was a glimmer of light in an endless night. The next day, driven by a sliver of hope, Adekunle walked to the outreach center Sarah had mentioned. He stood outside, wrestling with his pride and fear. To walk through those doors was to admit defeat. But the memory of Sarah's kindness was stronger than his pride. He took a deep breath and stepped inside. The place was clean and warm. No one stared. He was given a tray of food. He saw Sarah helping serve food. When she saw Adekunle, her face lit up with a warm smile. "I'm so glad you came," she said. He told her his name and a little about his home. Sarah saw past the tattered clothes and the weary face. She saw a man with a story. She found him clean clothes and arranged for him to have a hot shower. With each small act of grace, Adekunle felt himself coming back to life. The warmth and the human connection began to mend his fractured spirit. The dullness in his eyes was replaced by a spark of awareness. Sarah's help was a restoration of his humanity. Her unwavering kindness was the hand of grace that was pulling him out of the abyss. One afternoon, as Adekunle was helping to sweep, feeling useful for the first time in a long while, Sarah sat with him again. She said, "You mentioned you love stories," her tone gentle and encouraging. "Tell me one." Hesitantly, Adekunle began to speak. He pulled out his worn notebook, its pages soft with use, and he told her the story of the brave Yoruba king and the mystical river goddess. As he spoke, a transformation occurred. The broken, homeless man disappeared, and in his place stood Adekunle the storyteller. His voice grew strong, his hands animated, his eyes burned with the fire of his passion. Sarah listened, completely captivated. She was not just hearing a story, she was witnessing the raw, undeniable talent of a master craftsman. She saw the scenes he described, felt the emotions of his characters, and understood the power of his vision. When he finished, there were tears in her eyes. She said, "Adekunle, that was one of the most beautiful stories I have ever heard. You are not just a storyteller, you are a filmmaker." For Adekunle, hearing those words was like the sun breaking through the clouds after a long and devastating storm. Someone finally saw him. Someone finally understood. It turned out that Sarah was not just a kind-hearted volunteer. She worked as a personal assistant to a man named Marcus Thorne, one of Dallas's most respected and influential independent filmmakers. It was a detail she had never mentioned. She saw the potential in Adekunle, a raw, authentic voice that the world needed to hear. She said, "I want to introduce you to my boss." There was a determined look on her face. "I can't promise anything, but he needs to hear your stories. He needs to meet you." The idea was terrifying and exhilarating all at once. It felt too big, too impossible. A few days later, Adekunle found himself standing outside a sleek, modern office building, wearing the clean clothes Sarah had given him. He was nervous, his heart pounding against his ribs, but he was not the same man who had shivered in a doorway just a week before. He clutched his notebook, which no longer felt like a burden of failure, but a key. Sarah had not just cleaned him up and fed him, she had reminded him of who he was. She had rekindled his dream. She walked beside him, offering a reassuring smile, and led him through the glass doors. A door to a new world was opening. The meeting with Marcus Thorne was unexpected. He wasn't the cold executive Adekunle imagined, but a man who lived and breathed stories. Marcus saw the movie as Adekunle recounted the tale of the Yoruba king. He saw sweeping landscapes, vibrant costumes, and powerful drama. He recognized a goldmine of untold stories and a fresh perspective. By the end of the meeting, Marcus was committed. The next few months were a whirlwind. Adekunle was given an apartment and a desk in Marcus's production office. He worked tirelessly, pouring his memories, pain, and redemption into the script, collaborating with seasoned writers to shape his narrative. The story evolved into a powerful epic titled Ogun's River. Marcus secured funding, assembled a talented crew, and made Adekunle a consultant on set. The production took them to locations mirroring his African home. Stepping onto the set was a sacred moment. Seeing his words come to life was the manifestation of a dream. He was the heart of the entire production. Sarah watched with pride as the man she had rescued claimed his destiny. The storyteller had finally found his stage. The premiere of Ogun's River was a lavish affair at a historic Dallas theater a world away from the soup kitchens and shelters Adekunle had known. He walked the red carpet, blinded by the flashbulbs of photographers wearing a custom-tailored suit that felt like a costume. The murmuring crowd, the reporters shouting his name, it was surreal, overwhelming. He saw Marcus, beaming with pride, and Sarah, whose smile was his anchor in the storm of new sensations. He was introduced not as a project, but as a visionary, a new and powerful voice in cinema. The homeless man from the alleyways was gone, replaced by a celebrated artist. The film was more than a success. It was a phenomenon. Critics praised its emotional depth, its stunning visuals, and its authentic storytelling. Audiences were captivated by this world. They had never seen a story that was both epic and deeply human. Ogun's River broke box office records, becoming the surprise blockbuster of the year. Adekunle's journey from homelessness to Hollywood success became a story in itself, a tale of redemption that the media couldn't get enough of.
He was on magazine covers, talk shows, and news segments overnight.
Adekunle became a household name, a symbol of the enduring power of the American dream.
The money came flooding in an amount so vast, he couldn't comprehend it. It was a tidal wave of wealth that changed everything. He was no longer just a storyteller. He was a millionaire. The first thing he bought was a sprawling mansion in one of Dallas's most exclusive neighborhoods, a palace of glass and marble that stood in stark contrast to the park benches he once called home. He filled the garage with luxury cars, each one a gleaming symbol of his arrival. He bought expensive clothes, fine art, and gadgets he didn't know how to use.
He was trying to buy the security and status he had never had. His life became a constant celebration. There were parties every night, filled with people who wanted to be near him, to bask in the glow of his newfound fame. He was surrounded by beautiful, glamorous women who hung on his every word, their laughter echoing through the cavernous rooms of his new home. They were drawn to his power, his money, and the exotic story of his life. For a man who had suffered from chronic loneliness, this constant attention was intoxicating. He felt seen, desired, and important. He had not just conquered Dallas, he had become one of its kings. The mansion was a stage for his new life. The quiet solitude he needed to write was replaced by the constant thrum of music and the chatter of new friends. These people didn't know the man who had starved on the streets. They only knew the celebrity who paid for the champagne. They created a bubble of flattery around him, and he lost touch with the grounding reality of his past. His kingdom was built on excess, and he was its willing ruler. He bought houses and cars, each more extravagant than the last. He flew on private jets, vacationed on yachts, and wore watches that cost more than his entire village back home. He measured his worth by the size of his bank account and the number of his possessions. The women were a constant presence, offering him affection without challenge, adoration without substance. He was no longer Adekunle the man, but Adekunle the brand. In his new world, relationships were transactional. He was living the dream he thought he always wanted, but a hollow feeling began to grow. He was a storyteller who was no longer telling stories. The endless parties blurred into one long, hazy night. The faces changed, but the scene was always the same: loud music, flowing alcohol, and a sense of manufactured joy. The initial thrill began to wear off, leaving behind a familiar emptiness. His new companions offered him something more, presented as a way to enhance the party. A small white line, a pill offered with a casual smile. The pressure to belong was immense. He didn't want the party to stop, because when it stopped, the silence returned, and he felt that old loneliness creeping back in, so he gave in. He took that first step into a velvet trap disguised as a VIP lounge. The initial effect was a rush of euphoria, a wave of confidence that washed away all his insecurities. The emptiness was gone, replaced by a powerful artificial sense of well-being. The drugs offered a perfect, temporary oblivion. He started to associate the high with creativity, fooling himself into thinking he couldn't write without it. The velvet trap was soft and inviting. It didn't feel like a cage, it felt like an exclusive club. He was no longer just the king of his mansion. He was the high priest of a nightly ritual of self-destruction, surrounded by worshippers who were happy to help him burn his kingdom to the ground. The slide was gradual at first, then terrifyingly fast. The drugs that were once a party favor became a daily necessity. The man who had survived starvation was now a slave to chemical hunger. His days became oriented around securing drugs, and his nights were lost in a paranoid, substance-fueled haze. The work stopped completely. Meetings were missed. Calls from Marcus Thorne went unanswered. The script for his next great epic lay untouched, gathering dust while he chased a fleeting high. His appearance began to change. His eyes were perpetually bloodshot, his face puffy and pale. A constant tremor ran through his hands, the hands that had once written stories. His wealth allowed him to hide behind designer sunglasses and expensive clothes, but the damage was undeniable. The vibrant storyteller was disappearing again, replaced by a jittery, unpredictable addict. People started to keep their distance, wary of his erratic behavior. The money began to hemorrhage. He spent fortunes on drugs, on lavish gifts for fair-weather friends, and on bad investments. The fleet of cars was sold off. The houses were mortgaged, then lost. The entourage of women vanished as soon as the champagne stopped flowing, leaving him alone in the wreckage. The silence returned, louder and more terrifying than ever. He lost the mansion. He lost the respect of the industry. He lost contact with Sarah. Marcus Thorne finally cut ties. He had gone from pinnacle to depths. The dream had not just died, he had actively killed it. He had lost everything. Again, one day he woke up not in a plush bed, but on the cold floor of a cheap motel room, the last refuge his remaining cash could afford. When the money ran out, he was back where he had started. The tailored suit and Rolex were gone, sold for a pittance. The only thing he had left was the crushing weight of his failure and a body that screamed for a fix he could no longer afford. The journey had come full circle, a cruel, ironic loop. The streets were harsher this time. Now, he was a man haunted by his own choices. He was not just homeless, he was an addict, a ghost of a man who had thrown away a miracle. The suffering was more profound because he knew what he had lost. These memories were a form of torture, a constant reminder of the kingdom he had willingly destroyed. He was invisible again. People who had once read about him now walked past him without a second glance. The man begging for change was the same visionary who created Ogun's River. He had become a cautionary tale of what happens when you fly too close to the sun. His epic rise was now just the prologue to his tragic fall. The man who had been given a second chance at life had squandered it completely, and he saw no path to a third. The world of filmmaking felt like it belonged to another person in another lifetime. He was no longer a storyteller. He was a sad and pathetic story. He had no notebook, no ideas, no hope. The fire in his soul had been utterly extinguished by the torrent of drugs and self-pity. He was back in the concrete jungle, but this time he carried the knowledge that he had built this prison himself. He had lost everything to the enemy within. He was sitting on a curb as the rain began to fall. Adekunle was a hollowed-out version of himself, a prisoner of his past. He didn't look up as footsteps approached, and a shadow fell over him, shielding him from the rain. He heard a soft voice, much like the one he remembered. "You look like you've lost your way," the voice said. Adekunle slowly lifted his heavy head. He saw an older woman holding a large black umbrella. She looked at him with a profound sense of recognition. She held out a hand, offering a connection. "My name is Grace," she said. "Come with me. Let's get you out of this rain." Adekunle had no strength left to refuse. He allowed this woman named Grace to help him to his feet. They walked a few blocks to a small, unassuming church. This place felt like a sanctuary. Grace led him to a simple wooden pew and sat beside him in the silence, letting the peace seep into his weary bones. Grace began to speak, her voice a soothing balm. She didn't talk about sin or damnation. She talked about forgiveness, about mercy, about a love that was freely given. She told him a story not of an African king or river goddess, but of a man who had been a carpenter's son, a man who sought out the broken, the lost, and the forgotten, a man who offered a different kind of kingdom, one not built on wealth or power, but on humility and teens. She spoke of Jesus not as a distant, judgmental figure, but as a presence that understood suffering. Because he had endured it himself, Adekunle listened the storyteller in him, recognizing the power. It was a story of ultimate redemption, of a fall and a resurrection. It resonated with the deepest parts of his own experience. Grace explained that the emptiness he felt, the void he had tried to fill with fame, money, and drugs was a space meant for something else. It was a hunger of the soul. She told him no matter how far he had fallen, there was a path back. He didn't have to earn this second chance. He only had to accept it. Tears began to stream down Adekunle's face, silent at first, then turning into deep, wrenching sobs. It was a release of all the pain, the shame and the regret. He wept for the dream he had betrayed, for the people he had hurt, and for the man he had lost. Grace did not try to stop him. She simply sat with him, allowing him to pour out all the poison. In that small, quiet church, Adekunle finally surrendered. He let go of the pride, the anger, and the despair. When the tears subsided, he felt a profound emptiness, but it was a clean slate. He looked at Grace, his eyes red but clear. He whispered the first prayer of his life. In that moment, something shifted. A different kind of light began to dawn. The journey back was just beginning, but he was walking toward the light. Adekunle's life didn't magically transform back to riches and fame. The path to recovery was long and arduous. With guidance and support, he entered rehabilitation. He fought cravings and confronted deep-seated pain. He learned his worth wasn't tied to success or possessions. He was simply a man learning to walk again. He began to write again, but this time, not for fame. He wrote for his soul. He wrote about the streets, success and addiction, about kindness and mercy. His stories were about the human condition and faith. His new life was simple, and he found joy. He shared his story to offer hope. He spoke of reclaiming one's soul. His testimony became his most powerful film, Adekunle's journey became his masterpiece. It was a story of a dream, pursued, lost, and found again. It teaches us that success is measured by what we overcome. It shows that the deepest darkness can be pierced by kindness. True redemption is about finding what you truly need. His life is a testament to hope. It's never too late to write a new ending.